The cake was small. Vanilla, with pink frosting. Clara had piped herself at 11 at night after her second shift because the bakery downtown wanted $40 for something she could make for $6. The gift beside it was wrapped in paper she'd saved from Christmas 2 years ago, smoothed flat and reused because 5 years of marriage had taught her that love didn't need to be expensive. It just needed to be real. She climbed the stairs to the apartment she and Nathan had moved into 8 months ago. The starter place he'd promised was temporary. And she believed him because she always believed him. 6 years of double shifts as a diner waitress and a night shift hospital receptionist. So Nathan Pierce could sit in law school lecture halls instead of behind a cash register. 6 years of ramen dinners so his tuition checks cleared. 6 years of telling herself that when he passed the bar, they would finally get to live. Tonight was their 5th anniversary. Nathan had passed the bar 4 months ago. He'd started at a firm on the 40th floor of a glass building she couldn't afford to look up at without craning her neck. Clara told herself this was the beginning. She let herself in quietly, wanting to surprise him. She found him on the couch with Vanessa Cole's mouth against his throat, Vanessa's blouse unbuttoned, Nathan's hand fisted in hair that wasn't Clara's. The cake box slipped from Clara's fingers before she even understood what she was looking at. It hit the floor and the lid popped open, and the pink frosting smeared across the hardwood like something bleeding out. Nathan didn't jump up in shame. He didn't scramble for an explanation. He looked at her the way a man looks at an inconvenience, an email he forgot to answer, a bill he forgot to pay. "You're early," he said. That was it. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "This isn't what it looks like." Just an observation about her timing being wrong. As though the problem was that Clara had arrived, not that her husband was undressing another woman on their anniversary. Vanessa didn't even bother buttoning her blouse fully. She smoothed her hair back and looked Clara up and down. The thrift store dress, the flat shoes worn thin from standing 12 hours a day, and she smiled the way people smile when they've already won something. "Oh, don't cry," Vanessa said. "It's embarrassing for everyone." "Get out," Clara whispered. Her voice didn't sound like her own. Nathan stood up, buttoning his shirt with the calm of a man doing paperwork. "Actually, Clara, you should be the one to go. This is my apartment. My name's on the lease now. Remember, you signed off on that when we upgraded the loan." Clara's stomach dropped. She had signed off on that because she trusted him. Because 6 years of loving someone teaches you not to read fine print on the person you married. "Nathan, you don't fit anymore," he said. And he said it so simply, so without cruelty, that it was almost worse than if he'd screamed it. "You know that. You've known it for a while. I have partners coming to dinner next month. Clients. People who matter. I can't have you standing there in a Walmart dress talking about hospital copays." Vanessa laughed, actually laughed. A bright little sound like a bell, delighted at Clara's humiliation. She really thought this was going to be some big romantic anniversary. Vanessa said to Nathan, like Clara wasn't even in the room. "That's kind of sad, honestly." Clara stood in the wreckage of pink frosting and 5 years, and something inside her went very quiet. Not calm, just quiet, the way a house goes quiet after a storm rips the roof off. "Get your things," Nathan said. "Tonight. I already had a bag packed for you, actually." Figured this conversation was coming eventually. He gestured to a duffel bag by the door. He had packed it. Before she'd walked in, he had planned this. Maybe not tonight exactly, but some night, some ending, and he'd been ready for it while she was still icing a cake with hands cracked from dish soap. She didn't cry. She wanted to. But some part of her, the part that had learned in 6 years of double shifts how to keep moving even when her feet were bleeding through her shoes, took over. She picked up the bag. She checked her wallet with numb fingers. $42. That was what she had. Not because Nathan hadn't given her money, because she had spent everything on him, on tuition, on that stupid cake, on a life she'd thought was theirs together and turned out to belong only to him. "Nathan," she said quietly, one last time, "do you feel anything at all right now?" He looked at her for a long moment, and for just a second, just 1 second, something flickered behind his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced with the polished, unbothered face of a man who had already moved on. "I feel like you should go before it starts raining harder," he said. It was already raining. She hadn't even noticed. She walked out into the storm with $42, a duffel bag, and no idea where she was going to sleep that night. New York City swallowed her, the way it swallows everyone who's ever been thrown out into it. Indifferent, loud, glittering with lights that weren't for her. She didn't know it yet, but the worst night of her life was about to become the night that saved it. She'd walked 6 blocks in the rain, past a luxury hotel with a gold awning and a doorman who didn't look at her twice when she heard it. A child screaming, not crying, screaming, the raw animal terror of a small person who understood, on some instinctive level, that something was very wrong. "Let me go. Daddy! Daddy!" Clara's body moved before her mind caught up. She would think about that later, how 6 years of surviving Nathan hadn't burned the courage out of her. Not completely. Not the part that ran toward danger instead of away from it. Near the hotel's parking entrance, half hidden by a black delivery van, a man in a gray jacket had a little girl by the arm, dragging her toward an idling car. The girl couldn't have been more than 5. Her small shoes scraped uselessly against the wet pavement, her free hand clawing at the man's grip, her face a mask of pure animal fear. Clara didn't think. She didn't calculate the odds, or her own safety, or the fact that she had nothing left to lose that hadn't already been taken from her tonight. She swung her purse, heavy with a hairbrush, a water bottle, a paperback book, directly into the man's face. He staggered, cursing, and Clara didn't stop. She jabbed her umbrella into his ribs, clawed at the arm, holding the girl, screamed for help at the top of her lungs. The man shoved her hard enough that she hit the wet pavement, pain exploding through her hip and elbow, but she didn't let go of the girl's hand. She wrapped both arms around the child and turned her own back to the man, shielding the small body with hers, bracing for whatever came next. "Get away from her!" Clara screamed, and it wasn't a plea. It was a command, ripped from somewhere deep and furious inside her, somewhere that had absorbed years of being told to be smaller, quieter, more agreeable, and had finally run out of patience for any of it. Then the world changed. Headlights flooded the alley. Not one car, 3, 4. Black SUVs sliding to a stop with the kind of silent, coordinated precision that spoke of money and menace in equal measure. Doors opened. Men in dark suits poured out. And Clara understood in the half-second, before anything else happened, that these were not police. These were not good Samaritans. These were something else entirely, something that made the man who'd grabbed the little girl turn and bolt into the rain-slicked dark, abandoning his task rather than face what had just arrived. A man stepped out of the lead SUV. He moved like a blade unsheathing, controlled, unhurried, absolutely certain that the world would rearrange itself around him. Tall, dark-haired, dressed in a black coat that probably cost more than Clara had earned in the last 3 months combined. His eyes swept the scene once, the fleeing attacker, The SUVs already peeling off in pursuit, the little girl trembling in the arms of a soaked, bruised stranger. And something in his expression cracked open, just for a second, into something that looked almost like fear. "Lily," he said, and his voice broke on the single syllable. The little girl tore herself from Clara's arms and ran. "Daddy." He caught her, dropped to one knee on the wet pavement without a single thought for his $1,000 coat, and held her so tightly Clara could see his hands shaking. For just a moment, the most dangerous man in New York looked like nothing more than a father who had almost lost the only thing that mattered to him. Then his eyes found Clara. She was still on the ground, soaked, bleeding slightly from a scraped elbow, her cheap dress ruined, her purse destroyed, $42 still crumpled somewhere in her pocket. She looked, she was sure, like exactly what she was, a woman who'd been thrown away twice in one night, first by a husband and then by the pavement itself. The man's gaze was unreadable, calculating, dangerous. But Lily pulled back from her father's arms, twisted around, and reached for Clara instead. "Don't let her leave," the little girl said, her small voice fierce despite the tears streaking her face. "Daddy, don't let her leave. If this already has your heart racing, hit like, and tell us where you're watching from." Adrian Moretti had built an empire on the principle that fear was more reliable than loyalty. Judges feared him. Rival families feared him. Even his own men, the ones who'd bled for him, carried a healthy respect that bordered on terror. He had spent 16 years cultivating the kind of reputation that made grown men's hands shake when his name came up in conversation. He had absolutely no idea what to do with a woman kneeling in the rain, cradling his daughter's face in her hands, and murmuring something so soft he couldn't hear it over the sirens starting somewhere in the distance. "Bring them both inside," he told Marco, his voice clipped, controlled, giving nothing away. The car, now. Clara barely had time to process what was happening before she was ushered, not forced, not exactly, but firmly guided, into the back of an SUV so plush it felt like sitting inside a cloud. Lily refused to let go of her hand the entire ride, small fingers locked around Clara's, like she was afraid the world would simply take her again if she loosened her grip for even a second. "Who are you?" Adrian asked. He sat across from her, Lily wedged between them, his eyes doing the same cold, thorough sweep he'd given the crime scene, assessing, cataloging, deciding whether she was a threat. "Clara," she said. "Clara Bennett. I was walking, and I heard her screaming. She stopped, suddenly aware of how insane the whole night sounded when spoken aloud, thrown out by her husband. $42. A stranger's child in danger. I didn't know who she was. I didn't know any of this." She gestured vaguely at the SUV, the armed men, the man across from her, whose stillness felt like the eye of a hurricane. "That man tried to take her for ransom," Adrian said, his jaw tight. "Or worse. He's been watching this hotel for 3 days. My security failed. I failed." "You didn't fail," Clara said before she could stop herself. "You got there. That's not failing." Adrian's eyes flicked to her, surprised, as though he hadn't expected a stranger covered in bruises and rain to correct him. Lily tugged Clara's sleeve. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice small. "A little bit. Not badly." Clara smiled at her, the first real smile she'd managed all night. "You're very brave, you know that?" "I was scared," Lily whispered. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," Clara said. "It means you keep fighting anyway. And you did. You never stopped fighting him." Lily leaned her head against Clara's arm, and something in Adrian Moretti's chest, something that had been locked shut for 3 years, Since the night his wife died and left him alone with a toddler and an empire he no longer knew how to hold gently, cracked, just slightly, watching a total stranger say the exact words his daughter had needed to hear. But Adrian Moretti could terrify judges, criminals, and politicians. He had no idea how to comfort his own daughter, and he was starting to realize it. The estate outside Manhattan looked like something out of a period film. Iron gates, manicured grounds, a house so large Clara could have fit her entire childhood apartment building into its foyer. Men with earpieces stood at intervals along the drive, and dogs the size of small ponies paced a fenced perimeter in the dark. Inside, a Dr. Adrian had summoned checked Clara's scraped elbow and bruised hip with brisk efficiency, pronounced her fine, and left with instructions for rest that Clara had no intention of following, given that she had nowhere to rest and $42 to her name. She found Lily's bedroom by following the sound of a strange mechanical whirring and Adrian's low, increasingly frustrated voice. "Hold still," he was saying. Clara stopped in the doorway and stared. Adrian Moretti, feared Don of New York, a man who probably ordered executions before breakfast, was crouched in front of his 5-year-old daughter, holding a handheld car vacuum against her wet hair, its nozzle whirring uselessly, while Lily sat rigid and miserable on a stool, clutching a stuffed rabbit like a life raft. "Are you?" Clara said slowly, unable to help herself, drying her hair with that. Adrian didn't even look embarrassed. "It has airflow. It's a vacuum. It removes moisture from car interiors. The principle is the same." "The principle is not the same, Mr. Moretti." Clara crossed the room, gently took the vacuum from his hand, and set it aside like it was something unstable. "Do you have a hairdryer anywhere in this entire house?" He blinked. "I assume the staff. Where's the nursery bathroom?" He pointed, looking, for the first time since Clara had met him 3 hours ago, genuinely uncertain of himself. Clara found a proper dryer in a cabinet stocked with products still wrapped in plastic, untouched, purchased by someone who had clearly never used them. She sat Lily down, set the dryer to low heat, and began working through the girl's tangled curls with a brush, section by section, humming something low and tuneless under her breath, the way her own mother used to when Clara was small. Lily's shoulders, which had been up around her ears since the parking lot, slowly came down. Her death grip on the stuffed rabbit loosened. By the time Clara finished, the little girl was nearly asleep, sitting up, lulled by warmth and gentleness, and the particular, specific comfort of being cared for by someone who wasn't in a hurry. Adrian stood in the doorway the entire time, watching, arms crossed, an expression on his face that Clara couldn't quite name, something between confusion and awe. "How did you do that?" he asked quietly. Once Lily's eyes had fully closed and Clara had tucked her into bed. "Do what?" "She's been up for hours every night since her mother died. She won't let the housekeeper touch her hair. She screamed at the last 3 nannies I hired." He shook his head slowly. "You've known her for 3 hours. She wasn't upset about her hair," Clara said, keeping her voice low as they stepped into the hallway, pulling the door mostly closed behind them. She was upset about being scared and alone, and about a man who tried to hurt her. The hair was just the last straw. Kids don't always cry about what they say they're crying about. Adrian studied her for a long moment. "Are you afraid of me?" Clara considered the question honestly, the way she considered most things. "I should be," she admitted. "Everyone says you're a monster. And what do you think?" "I think," she said slowly, "a monster wouldn't have panicked over a 5-year-old's wet hair." Something that might have been the beginning of a smile touched the corner of Adrian's mouth. It disappeared quickly, but not quickly enough that Clara didn't see it. "Sit down, Miss Bennet," he said, gesturing toward a study down the hall. "We need to talk. I have a proposal, and I think you're going to want to hear it." The study was all dark wood and low lighting, a fire already crackling in the hearth despite the late hour, as though someone had anticipated this exact conversation would happen tonight. Adrian poured 2 glasses of something amber and didn't drink his. "I'm in the middle of a custody battle," he said without preamble. "My wife died 3 years ago. Cancer. Fast, 6 months from diagnosis to funeral. Since then, her parents, Eleanor and Richard Voss, have been trying to take Lily from me. Why? Because Eleanor believes a man in my line of work is unfit to raise a child, and because Lily's mother left her a trust fund worth more money than most countries' GDP, and Eleanor would very much like to control it until Lily turns 25. His voice was flat, controlled, but something underneath it. Old grief, older anger, leaked through despite his best efforts. The court doesn't care that I love my daughter more than my own life. It cares about optics, stability, a traditional home, a mother figure. So you've tried to remarry. I've tried to appear to remarry. 3 women in the last year. Society wives, connected families, women who understood the arrangement would be temporary and beneficial to everyone. He finally took a drink. Lily hated every one of them. Why? Because they looked at me, Adrian said simply, not at her. They performed affection for Lily when I was in the room and ignored her the second I wasn't. Children know the difference, apparently, better than adults do. Clara thought of Lily's small hand gripping hers in the SUV. "Don't let her leave." "You looked at her," Adrian continued, watching Clara's face carefully. "In the parking lot, in the car, in her room just now. You never once looked at me like I mattered more than she did. She noticed, she's 5, and she noticed something none of the women I introduced her to over the last year ever managed." Clara's stomach tightened, understanding where this was going a half-second before he said it. "I want to propose a marriage," Adrian said. 1 year, a legal contract. You would move in, you would help care for Lily, attend court dates and public events, present as my wife to the judge and to Eleanor Voss's lawyers. In exchange, I would pay you a significant sum, protect you from anyone who might wish you harm, including, from what my men found in the last hour, an ex-husband with a habit of lying to police about domestic disputes he started. And at the end of the year, once custody is secured, we divorce and you walk away with your life entirely your own. Clara stared at him. "You looked me up in the last hour?" "I look everyone up," Adrian said, unbothered. "Nathan Pierce, associate at Whitfield and Cross. Married you at 23, put himself through law school on your income, was seen at a downtown restaurant 2 hours ago with a woman who is not his wife, and according to the lease records, changed the locks on your shared apartment 11 days ago. He was planning to throw you out before tonight. Tonight was simply his excuse." Clara felt something cold settle in her chest. 11 days. He'd been planning this for 11 days, and she'd spent that time baking a cake. "What are we supposed to be?" she asked, forcing her voice steady. "In this marriage, business partners," Adrian said. "And love, not part of the contract." Something in Clara relaxed at that, oddly. Relief, not disappointment. "Good," she said. "I'm done being stupid for love." From the doorway, small and sudden, Lily's voice cut through the quiet. "I want her." She stood there in her pajamas, rabbit clutched to her chest, having apparently woken and wandered down the hall in search of the voices. "Daddy, I want her." Adrian looked at his daughter, then at Clara, and something decided itself in his face. "All right," he said quietly. "Then it's decided." But Clara had no idea that a one-year contract would eventually feel less like a business arrangement and more like the first true home she had ever known. The wedding, if it could be called that, happened 4 days later in a small courtroom with a judge Adrian clearly knew personally, and 2 witnesses Clara had never met. There was no dress, no cake, no flowers, just a quiet exchange of vows that meant nothing and everything at once, and a ring that Adrian slid onto Clara's finger with hands that were, for once, not entirely steady. The ring was an antique, delicate gold band with a single deep-set sapphire, clearly old, clearly precious. "This is too much," Clara said, staring at it under the courtroom's fluorescent lights. "I can wear something simpler. This looks like it belongs in a museum." "It belonged to my mother," Adrian said. "She wore it for 40 years before she died. I want Lily to see it on someone's hand again. Adrian, it's too valuable." "So are you," he said, and then seemed almost startled by his own words and looked away before she could respond. She moved into the estate that same week. She refused, initially, to touch the allowance Adrian had set up in her name, arguing about it more than once across the same dark wood desk where he'd first proposed the arrangement. "I don't need this much money," she insisted, pushing a folder of financial documents back across the desk. "I need enough to live, not this." "You're my wife," Adrian said, not looking up from the report he was reading. "On paper, and in every way that matters to the people trying to destroy this family. If Eleanor's investigators find that you're living here with nothing to your name, it looks exactly like what they want it to look like. A desperate woman I paid to play a part. You need independence. Real independence. Not an allowance you're embarrassed to spend. And if I don't want to take money from a man I'm not really married to, then think of it as combat pay," Adrian said, finally meeting her eyes. "Because make no mistake, Clara, marrying me is dangerous. My enemies will see this ring and understand exactly what it means. You deserve to be compensated for the risk, whether or not you ever spend a cent of it." She took the money eventually, but she never touched it for anything but the barest necessities. And Adrian noticed that too, filing it away with everything else he was slowly beginning to notice about the woman who had walked into his life, soaked and bleeding and furious, refusing to let go of his daughter's hand. The first weeks passed in a strange, careful rhythm. Clara focused almost entirely on Lily, and Adrian, watching from a careful distance, found himself unable to look away. There was the night Clara read Lily a bedtime story about a lighthouse keeper's daughter, and Lily, halfway through, asked in a small voice, "Will you leave too?" Like Mommy did. Like the other ladies did. Clara set the book down. She took Lily's small hand in both of hers and held it like something precious. "I'm not going to promise you I'll never leave," she said carefully, because she had learned, in 29 years of life, that broken promises hurt worse than honest uncertainty. Nobody can promise that, but I can promise you this. I won't leave without saying goodbye. I won't disappear on you. And for as long as I'm here, you can trust that I'm really here, okay? She held out her pinky finger. Lily looked at it for a long moment, then wrapped her small pinky around it. "Pinky promise? Pinky promise." Lily fell asleep within minutes, more peacefully than she had in 3 years. According to the night nurse who'd cared for her since infancy, and who mentioned it to Marco the next morning, with something like wonder in her voice. There was the disastrous afternoon they attempted to bake cookies, flour dusted across every surface of the enormous kitchen. Lily's small hands covered in dough up to the wrist. The resulting cookies burnt on the bottom and raw in the middle and utterly inedible. Lily ate 3 of them anyway, declaring them delicious. And Clara laughed until her stomach hurt, a sound she hadn't made in longer than she could remember. There was the evening Clara taught Lily how to properly brush her doll's hair without pulling the strands out, demonstrating with slow, careful motions, and Lily watched with the fierce concentration of a child memorizing something sacred. And then there was the Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks in, when Lily fell off the porch step and scraped her knee and came running through the house in tears and skidded to a stop in front of Clara instead of anyone else in that enormous house full of guards and staff, and sobbed, "Mommy, it hurts." The word hung in the air. Lily froze, seeming to hear it herself a half-second after saying it, her eyes going wide with something like panic. As if she'd broken a rule she hadn't known existed. Clara didn't hesitate. She scooped the little girl up, held her close, pressed a kiss to her hair, and said, "Let's get you cleaned up, sweetheart," as though the word had always belonged there, as though it hadn't just cracked something open in her chest that she'd spent 6 years learning to keep sealed. She didn't notice Adrian in the doorway until much later, once Lily was bandaged and settled with a cartoon and a juice box, and Clara had slipped into the hallway to catch her breath, tears finally sliding down her face. Not sad tears, not exactly, but something more complicated. The overwhelming realization that she had, without meaning to, without planning to, become needed by someone again. That she still had that in her, after everything Nathan had taken. "She's never called anyone that," Adrian said quietly, appearing beside her. "Not the nannies, not the women I introduced her to, not even, at the end, her own mother, because Elena was too sick by then to be the one comforting her." He paused. "Only you." "I didn't ask her to," Clara said, wiping her face quickly, embarrassed to be caught crying. "I know," Adrian said. "That's exactly why she did." Then Lily called her mommy, and nothing about this contract could stay simple after that. Adrian began changing in ways so gradual that Clara almost didn't notice them until they'd accumulated into something undeniable. He stopped holding late-night meetings in the study adjacent to Lily's room, moving them instead to the West Wing, out of earshot of nightmares. He started coming home before dinner, instead of after Lily's bedtime, some nights arriving in time to sit awkwardly through a meal of chicken nuggets shaped like dinosaurs, clearly uncertain how to make conversation with a 5-year-old but trying anyway. Asking questions about her day, with the same seriousness he probably brought to negotiating territory disputes. One night, close to a month into the arrangement, Clara found him standing outside Lily's door at 2 a.m., frozen, listening to his daughter cry out in her sleep. "She has nightmares sometimes," Clara said softly, coming up beside him. "About the parking lot." "I know," Adrian said. "I don't know what to do. I go in and she wants you, not me." "She wants comfort," Clara said. "Not me specifically. She's learned that I show up when it's hard. You can learn that too." "How?" "Go in. Don't fix anything. Don't try to solve it like a problem. Just sit on the bed and be there until she falls back asleep. That's it. That's the whole job." Adrian looked at the door like it was a door to a war room, not a child's bedroom. Then he squared his shoulders. The same motion, Clara suspected, that he used before walking into rooms full of armed enemies, and went inside. She stood in the hallway and listened to his low, uncertain voice murmuring something to his daughter, and Lily's crying slowly quieting, and something in Clara's chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with Nathan or grief or $42 in a coat pocket. and everything to do with watching a dangerous man learn, clumsily and sincerely, how to be gentle. The next morning, over coffee, she found him at the kitchen table, looking exhausted but oddly peaceful. "She stayed asleep the rest of the night," he said, "after I sat there." "I told you." "You did." He studied her over the rim of his cup. "You said something to me once. About her heart." "I remember. You said I protect her body, but she needs someone to protect her heart." He set the cup down carefully. "I've spent 3 years thinking that if I built enough walls around her, hired enough guards, that would be enough. That safety was the whole job." "Safety's not nothing," Clara said. "But it's not everything either." "No," Adrian agreed quietly. "I'm learning that." He didn't say anything more, but something had shifted between them, subtle and unmistakable. The way weather shifts before a storm you can't yet see on the horizon. The invitation for Lily's 6th birthday party, thrown as a lavish charity gala disguised as a child's celebration. Another calculated move in the custody war, meant to demonstrate to the judge and to the public that Lily Moretti lived a stable, loving, normal life, arrived with a guest list 200 names long. Clara didn't recognize most of them, but 2 names on the list stopped her cold when she saw them scrawled in Adrian's assistant's careful handwriting. Nathan Pierce and Vanessa Cole. +1s for a donor from Nathan's firm who'd apparently taken an interest in one of Adrian's legitimate business ventures. "I can have them removed from the list," Adrian said, watching Clara's face carefully when she showed him. Clara considered it for a long moment. Then she shook her head. "No," she said. "Let them come. I'm not going to hide from my own life." She should have known it wouldn't be that simple. The party sprawled across the estate's grounds. A marquee tent strung with lights, a small orchestra, more caterers than Clara had ever seen in one place, and children running everywhere, while their wealthy, watchful parents mingled and gossiped and calculated social advantage over champagne. Lily wore a yellow dress and had insisted, over the objections of the professional catering staff, that she and Clara bake at least 1 cake themselves, the real way, to go alongside the elaborate 3-tier confection the caterers had prepared. That homemade cake, lopsided, imperfect, made with Lily's small flour-dusted hands and Clara's patient guidance, sat proudly on its own table near the entrance, a small monument to 2 months of bonding. Nathan and Vanessa arrived an hour into the party, dressed in clothes that cost more than Clara had earned in years of double shifts, moving through the crowd with the easy confidence of people who believed they belonged wherever they walked. Clara saw them before they saw her, and for a moment, old instinct made her want to disappear into the crowd, to make herself small the way 6 years of marriage had trained her to do. She didn't. She stood beside the homemade cake table, adjusting a slightly crooked decoration when Vanessa's voice cut through the ambient party noise like a blade. "Clara? Oh my God. Is that you? I almost didn't recognize you. Is this your job now? Catering?" Vanessa's laugh was bright, cruel, performative, aimed as much at the small crowd nearby as at Clara herself. "I'm not catering," Clara said evenly. Sure. Whatever they're calling nanny work these days." Vanessa's eyes swept over Clara's dress, nice but simple, compared to the designer gowns surrounding them, with theatrical pity. "It's actually kind of sweet, honestly. You always did have that whole nurturing thing going for you. Nathan used to say you'd have made a great mother if you'd ever had the money for it." Nathan, standing beside her, had the decency to look uncomfortable, but not enough of it to stop what was happening. "That's a nice little cake," Vanessa continued, gesturing at the lopsided homemade dessert Lily had worked on for hours. Very. Rustic. Did you make it in your studio apartment kitchen? Oh, wait. She laughed again. You don't have one of those anymore, do you? She reached out, almost lazily, and shoved the cake stand. It wasn't hard. It didn't need to be. The lopsided cake toppled and smeared across the white tablecloth. Ruined in an instant, 2 hours of careful work, destroyed in a single careless gesture. Lily, who had run over just in time to see it happen, burst into tears. That was our cake, she sobbed. Mommy and I made it. Nathan's head snapped toward Clara, something calculating flickering in his eyes. Mommy? He looked at Clara like he was solving a puzzle. You're, what, playing house with some mobster's kid now? God, Clara, this is exactly like you. You always did know how to attach yourself to whoever had the most to offer. She's not the nanny, Lily said, her voice suddenly loud and clear and furious, cutting through the murmur of the surrounding crowd. She's not staff. She's my mom. The words landed like a physical blow. Conversation around them died. Dozens of well-dressed guests turned to watch, sensing blood in the water. The particular thrill of witnessing someone else's humiliation unfold live. Nathan opened his mouth to say something else. Clara could see the cruelty already forming behind his eyes. But a shadow fell across the table, and every conversation within 20 feet went suddenly, completely silent. Adrian Moretti had arrived. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I don't believe we've met, he said, his eyes fixed on Nathan, with an intensity that made the younger man visibly shrink. Adrian Moretti, and you must be the associate who let Whitfield and Cross's biggest donor tonight sponsor his firm's summer gala. He turned slowly toward Clara, and something in his expression softened entirely, a complete transformation from the ice he'd just leveled at Nathan. Clara, my wife. He said the words with a weight that made them impossible to mistake for anything other than exactly what they claimed to be. The crowd's murmur shifted instantly from scandal to shock. Vanessa's face went pale. Nathan stammered, Wife, we didn't know. No, Adrian said, his voice cold and precise as a scalpel. You didn't know that the woman you humiliated in your own apartment 11 weeks ago, the woman you threw into the street with $42 after 6 years of her working double shifts to put you through law school. You didn't know she'd end up standing in my home, wearing my mother's ring, raising my daughter, who loves her more in 2 months than you managed to love your own wife in 6 years. Nathan had gone completely white. You built your entire career on her sacrifice, Adrian continued, his voice never rising, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd shouted. Every tuition check she covered with a shift she shouldn't have had to work. Every meal she skipped so you could eat. Every year of your life that was actually funded by hers. And your first instinct, seeing her again, was to mock her for it. He shook his head slowly, contempt radiating off him like heat. You threw away the only valuable thing you ever had, Mr. Pierce. I hope Miss Cole is worth it. The silence that followed was total. Vanessa, humiliated and furious, grabbed Nathan's arm and pulled him toward the exit, muttering something about the party being in poor taste. The crowd's wisps followed them the entire way, no longer whispers of scandal about Clara, but about the lawyer, who'd been publicly dismantled by the most dangerous man in the room for the crime of underestimating the woman he'd discarded. Adrian crouched beside Lily, who was still sniffling over the ruined cake, and gently wiped a smear of frosting from her cheek. We'll make another one, he said. Tomorrow. You'll have to teach me, though. I'm told I have no talent for this. Lily managed a wet, hiccuping laugh. You're really bad at it. I know, Adrian said solemnly. That's why I need you and Mommy both. Clara felt her breath catch at the easy, natural way he said the word. Mommy. Not as though it were a performance for the crowd, as though it were simply true. Nathan thought Clara was still the woman he'd thrown away. He was wrong. But victories like that one came with a price, and Eleanor Voss made sure Clara understood exactly what that price would be. 3 days after the party, Adrian's lawyer called an emergency meeting. Eleanor's team had filed an emergency motion, citing the public spectacle at Lily's birthday party as evidence of instability in the household. A cake destroyed, a scene created, a child crying in front of 200 witnesses. They're twisting it, Adrian said, pacing his study while Marco reviewed the filing with a grim expression. Vanessa Cole shoved the cake. Nathan started the confrontation, and somehow this becomes evidence against us. Eleanor's lawyers are good, Marco said. They're arguing that Clara's presence introduced chaos and conflict into what's supposed to be a stable environment. They're also. He hesitated, glancing at Clara. They've subpoenaed Nathan Pierce as a witness. Clara's stomach dropped. For what? To testify about your character, your marriage, your reliability as a maternal figure. 2 weeks later, Nathan sat across from Eleanor Voss's legal team in a deposition room, and Clara, watching the transcript arrive on Adrian's desk that evening, felt something in her chest crumble entirely. Nathan Pierce, under oath, stated that Clara Bennett had, in his words, always wanted a rich life and would play mother to anyone if paid enough. He characterized their marriage as one in which Clara was emotionally unstable and prone to attachment issues. He suggested that her sudden marriage to a man of significant means, mere weeks after their divorce, indicated a pattern of opportunism rather than genuine affection. Clara read it twice, then set it down with shaking hands. He's lying, she whispered. All of it. I gave up everything for him, and now he's turning it into a weapon against me? Eleanor's paying him, Marco said quietly. We're still tracing the exact figure, but the pattern's clear. She reached out to him directly after the party. Clara sat in the study long after Adrian and Marco had left to strategize, staring at the transcript, feeling something old and familiar creeping back in. The sense that she was, somehow, always going to be the woman not worth defending, not worth believing, no matter how hard she worked or how much she gave. I should leave, she said quietly, when Adrian returned to find her still sitting there, hours later. What? I'm the weak point in your case, Clara said. Every day I stay here, I give Eleanor more ammunition. My ex-husband, my finances, everything about me is a liability now. If I leave, if we quietly end the contract early, maybe the story becomes simpler for the judge. Maybe Lily's case gets stronger without me complicating it. Adrian crossed the room and crouched in front of her chair, forcing her to meet his eyes. You are not the weakness in this house, he said, his voice low and fierce. You are the only reason it feels like a home. Do you understand me? Before you came here, I had a fortress, guards, money, power, and a 5-year-old who cried herself to sleep every night because none of it meant anything to her. You didn't complicate this case, Clara. You air this case. You are the proof that Lily has what she needs. Eleanor's lawyers don't see it that way. Then we make them see it, Adrian said, in court, where it matters. Clara stayed. But she went to bed that night, more frightened than she'd been. Since the rain-soaked evening, she first saw a man trying to drag Adrian's daughter into a car. Because this time, the danger wasn't a stranger in a parking lot. It was the possibility that she might lose Lily anyway, no matter how hard she fought. The courtroom on the day of the custody hearing was packed. journalists in the back rows, Eleanor Voss seated at the plaintiff's table in a suit the color of old money, her lawyers arranged around her like a legal phalanx. Adrian sat rigid beside Clara, dressed in a dark suit that made him look, for once, less like a Don and more like a man terrified of losing everything that mattered. Eleanor's lead attorney rose first, and for nearly an hour dismantled Adrian's reputation piece by piece, his business associations, his family history, decades of rumor and innuendo presented as near fact, painting the picture of a man too dangerous, too violent, too criminal to be trusted with a child's well-being. Then they turned to Clara. "Miss Bennett," the attorney said, deliberately using her maiden name, a small cruelty designed to remind the room that her marriage to Adrian was recent, possibly manufactured. "You married Mr. Moretti 11 weeks after your divorce from Nathan Pierce was finalized. Isn't that correct?" "Yes. And in that time, you've assumed a maternal role toward a child you have no blood relation to, no legal guardianship of prior to this marriage, and, by your own admission in earlier testimony, met for the first time only hours before agreeing to a marriage arrangement with her father. Isn't that also correct?" "Yes," Clara said again, her voice steady despite the way her hands trembled in her lap. "So you would agree, Miss Bennett, that you are not, in any meaningful sense, this child's mother." The word hit the room like a slap. Clara felt Adrian tense beside her, felt Lily's small hand. She'd insisted on being present, seated with a court-appointed advocate in the gallery, squeezed tighter around the stuffed rabbit she'd brought. Clara stood. "May I answer that fully, Your Honor?" she asked. The judge nodded, curious despite herself. Clara turned toward the gallery, toward Eleanor's cold, expectant face, and let herself speak the truth she'd been carrying for weeks. "You're right," she said. "I didn't give birth to Lily. I wasn't there for her first word. I wasn't there for her first steps, her first day of preschool, any of the moments that are supposed to define what a mother is. I met her for the first time in the rain, fighting off a man who was trying to hurt her, and I didn't even know her name yet." She paused, steadying her breath. "But I was there," she continued, "when she woke up crying 3 nights in a row and asked me if mothers always leave, because hers did, even though it wasn't her fault, even though dying isn't a choice. I was there when she ruined a batch of cookies so badly the smoke alarm went off, and she looked at me like she expected me to be angry, and I laughed instead, and she laughed too, for the first time in longer than anyone in that house could remember. I was there when she looked at me like she was afraid to love me, because in her 5 years on this earth, she'd already learned that loving someone means eventually losing them. And I stayed, anyway, every single day. Not because a contract told me to, because I wanted to." The courtroom had gone completely silent. "You can question my timeline," Clara said, her voice steady now, stronger than she'd ever heard it. "You can question my marriage, my past, my ex-husband's opinion of my character. But you cannot tell that little girl in the gallery that what exists between us isn't real, because she is the only one who gets to decide that, and she decided it a long time before any of you did." She sat down. The room stayed silent for a long moment before the judge cleared her throat and called a recess. Adrian had wanted, more than once, during the proceedings, to solve the problem the way he solved every other problem, with money, with pressure, with the quiet, absolute power that came from being the most feared man in the city. He'd nearly gone to Eleanor's home himself, twice, before Clara stopped him. "Don't win this like a Don," she told him the night before the verdict, standing in the study where this had all begun 11 weeks earlier. "Win it like her father." Adrian looked at her for a long moment. You think I don't know the difference? I think you've spent so long being one that you forget you're allowed to be the other. He was quiet for a while. Then he nodded, once, and let Marco's investigation do the work instead of his fists. It paid off. 2 days before closing arguments, Marco uncovered a paper trail Eleanor's team hadn't been careful enough to hide. Wire transfers from an account traced back to Eleanor Voss, deposited into Nathan Pierce's account exactly 6 days after the birthday party, the same week his deposition was filed. Bribery, plain and undeniable, laid out in black and white bank records that Adrian's lawyers presented in court with the same quiet precision Clara had used on the stand. Eleanor's face, for the first time in the entire proceeding, lost its composure. Nathan's testimony was thrown out entirely, his firm informed of the bribery scheme by Adrian's legal team, a courtesy Adrian insisted on over Marco's objections, because let the court destroy her, not us, quietly terminated his employment within the week. Vanessa, it turned out, had little interest in staying with an unemployed, publicly disgraced lawyer and left before the ink was dry on his termination letter. The judge's ruling, when it came, was unambiguous. Full custody to Adrian Moretti, Eleanor Voss's petition dismissed with prejudice, her standing to pursue further legal action against the family revoked. Lily, who had been waiting in the hallway with her court advocate, ran the moment the doors opened and threw herself into Clara's arms with a force that nearly knocked them both over. "We won?" she asked, breathless. "We won," Clara said, laughing and crying at the same time, holding the little girl as tightly as she'd held her that first rainy night in the parking lot. Adrian knelt beside them both, and for a long moment, the three of them simply stayed there in the courthouse hallway. A family the law had just, officially, formally recognized, even if only one of the 3 relationships in that embrace was actually written into any legal document yet. The marriage was supposed to last 1 year. The months that followed the custody ruling passed differently than the ones before it. Lighter, somehow, the specter of Eleanor's lawsuit no longer hanging over every family dinner, every bedtime story, every ordinary domestic moment that Clara had once feared might be used as evidence against them. Adrian came home earlier, more often. Lily's nightmares grew rarer, then stopped almost entirely. The 3 of them fell into a rhythm that felt increasingly less like an arrangement and more like a life. But contracts have expiration dates, and Clara felt this one approaching with a dread she couldn't quite name. It came to a head on an ordinary Tuesday evening, nearly a year to the day since the rescue in the rain, when Lily climbed into Clara's lap after her bath, still damp-haired and warm, and asked, in the innocent, devastating way only children can manage, "Mommy? Can I still call you Mommy when the year is over?" Clara froze. She hadn't told Lily about the contract's terms, hadn't wanted her to know that the arrangement had ever had an ending built into it, a year-long expiration stamped into the fine print of a legal document. Lily was too young to understand, but children absorb more than adults realize, and somewhere in the house's quiet conversations between Adrian and his lawyers, Lily had clearly picked something up. "Sweetheart," Clara started, and found she had no idea how to finish the sentence. Adrian, standing in the doorway with a stack of papers in his hand, saw the moment happen in real time. Saw his daughter's small, hopeful face and Clara's stricken one, and understood with sudden, complete clarity exactly how deep this had all become for all 3 of them. He didn't answer for Clara. He let the silence sit, watching, and something in his chest made a decision that had, perhaps, already been made weeks ago without his full awareness of it. That night, after Lily was asleep, Clara found him in the study. "I think it's time," she said quietly, before he could speak. "The year's almost up. The custody case is settled. I don't want to make this harder than it needs to be, for her or for you." She was already rehearsing her goodbye. She could feel it forming. The practical, careful speech she'd been preparing for weeks, without admitting to herself that she was preparing it. About how grateful she was, about how much this year had meant, about how she'd always loved Lily, even from wherever she ended up next. Adrian set 2 documents on the desk between them. The first was the divorce paperwork, drawn up exactly as their contract specified, ready for her signature. Beside it sat a second document. Clara picked it up with trembling hands and read the header twice before the words fully registered. Petition for adoption. "I hired you," Adrian said quietly, "because my daughter needed a mother." He paused. The fire crackled in the silence. Clara couldn't breathe. "I'm asking you to stay," he continued, "because I need my wife." "I thought love wasn't part of the contract," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "It wasn't." Adrian took a step closer, close enough now that she could see the vulnerability in his face. A man who could face down armed enemies without flinching, utterly undone by the possibility of this one specific rejection. "That's why this isn't a contract, Clara. This is me asking you, with nothing legal binding you, to say yes. If you sign the divorce papers, I'll respect it. I won't fight you. You'll leave with everything we agreed on and my gratitude for everything you've given this family. But if there's any part of you that wants to stay, not because Lily needs a mother, not because a judge needs to see a stable home, but because you want to be here, then stay. Not as an employee, not as a business partner, as my wife, as Lily's mother, for real this time." Clara looked down at the 2 documents on the desk, one an ending, one a beginning, and thought of $42 in a torn coat pocket, of Nathan's flat, unmoved face telling her she didn't fit anymore, of a little girl's hand gripping hers in the rain and refusing to let go. She thought about what it meant to be chosen, not needed for what she could provide, not tolerated for what she could endure, but chosen, simply and entirely, for who she was. "Ask me again," she said softly. "Not like a contract, just ask me." Adrian took her hands in both of his. "Clara Bennett," he said, "will you stay? Not for a year, not for a case, for as long as you want to be here, which I am selfishly hoping is forever." Clara laughed, a wet, overwhelmed sound, half laugh and half sob, and picked up the adoption papers instead of the divorce documents. "Forever," she said. "I choose forever." Lily found them a few minutes later, drawn from her room by voices she couldn't quite make out, standing barefoot in the doorway of the study in her pajamas. "Is Mommy staying?" she asked, her small voice caught between hope and fear, the same fear that had lived in her since the day her real mother never came home from the hospital. Clara knelt down, opened her arms, and Lily ran into them the way she had that very first night in the rain-soaked parking lot, when a stranger's fierce love had been the only safety she could find. "Forever," Clara said, holding her tight, meaning it with everything she had left to give, which, it turned out, after everything Nathan had taken, was still quite a lot. The following weekend, the 3 of them attempted, once again, to bake cookies together. Adrian, despite months of practice, remained hopeless with a mixing bowl, managing to spill flour across half the kitchen, while Lily narrated his failures with delighted, merciless 5-year-old honesty. The cookies came out just as burnt on the bottom and raw in the middle, as they had that very first disastrous afternoon, nearly a year ago. Everyone ate them anyway. Clara Bennett lost a husband on the worst night of her life. She lost her home, her savings, her sense of what her future was supposed to look like. All of it, gone in the space of one cruel evening, replaced by $42 and a duffel bag packed by a man who'd already decided she didn't matter. But in the rain, on that same terrible night, she found a little girl who needed a mother, and a dangerous man who had forgotten how to be gentle, and had almost given up believing he ever could be again. What began as a contract, a business arrangement, a courtroom strategy, a year with an expiration date stamped into every clause, became the one thing none of them had dared to hope for, a family that chose each other. Not because a lawyer required it, or a judge demanded proof of it, or a contract obligated it. Because, in the end, that was simply who they were. If this story touched your heart, like this video, subscribe for more emotional mafia romance stories, and tell us in the comments. Which moment moved you most? Lily calling Clara mommy, or Adrian asking her to stay?